Cool. Yeah. So Avani, yeah, maybe you can start by sharing something about yourself and then I'll go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Rasha. It's been a pleasure. My name is Avani. I would probably identify most as being a community builder, and like community coach and supporter. But I've spent, in terms of like career-wise, my career journey started in international development and NGOs and nonprofits. And I learned how to build communities face to face on the ground, like with actual people. This was before the age of the internet. So I'm dating myself a little bit, aging myself a little bit, and sort of then moved into how those spaces can translate into digital spaces. And now I work with Meta, and I am a strategic partner manager, which basically means coach and like a supporter to community leaders that build their communities using Meta, what we know as Facebook, using Facebook's platforms. So that could be Facebook groups, it could be WhatsApp groups, it could be Instagram. Lots of people are using those platforms to build community. And I'm deeply, deeply, deeply interested in connection and empathy in digital communities and how we preserve that even when digital communities become even more important than meeting people face to face in this day and age. So that's what brings me to you today.
All right. So again, just for the benefit of anyone who's watching this recording, so I'm Rasha. I run an organization called Empathy Matters Private Limited, the flagship initiative of which is the Empathy University. So I provide workshops, webinars, and certification programs on empathy as a a core occupational skill and also psychological well-being. So these are the sort of programs I do career-wise. So again, I'm a huge believer in connection, and I think that's the reason why we connected so well. And just going back to how we met, right? I mean, I think we connected over LinkedIn and then jumped on a call, and I think the connection was instant, and there was so much we had to talk about, and I remember the call just going on, and then we met in person as well. Right? Yeah, so lovely.
So rare, right?
Yeah.
Meet somebody like that randomly, especially in your adult life. So it was great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I was thinking we could just talk about communities and some of the challenges we face in building communities and whatnot, and how empathy ties into all of that.
I love this. And I like one of the things that you and I have discussed is sort of like the breakdown of community for people. Like we live in an age of loneliness, right? And many people are, loneliness comes from certain things. Like I think the conditions are things like isolation and lack of community and um not a very good sense of like what's around you, because you actually don't even have to, most of us live in societies where we don't even have to interact with humans on a day-to-day basis. We can do everything through an app. Our groceries can come to an app through an app. Our food can come through an app. Like you can be in your house and do all the work and sort of never have to step outside or see people. And so some of these things are I think the precursors to loneliness.
Yeah.
And one of the, I think, effects of loneliness, or something that exacerbates loneliness, is not having community around you. And when I say community, it's really just like people who you identify with, who are on a similar journey with you, that you can connect with, where you're able to give something of yourself and you're also able to receive something back for that giving, right? There's sort of like participation and reward. And so people don't have those spaces. I remember reading or seeing something, and I'll try to find this study like when we put this talk up, but one of the biggest communities that a lot of people used to be a part of are religious communities. And increasingly people are not participating in organized religion, which is something that was specific to the US. And so with that anchor point of your life missing, the other example I could think of is like school or university. But during the pandemic, all of that went online and continues to stay online. We continue to do it remotely. So you're sort of missing that anchor point where people of different walks of life and perspectives are gathered. And so you're just not around.
Yeah. This reminds me also of this of something that came up during a recent circle that we had, and it's about how systems are also changing, right? Generally, how economically and we are organized, in the sense, early on we used to have like joint family systems and whatnot, and this came up actually for me because recently when I met a couple of people who actually came from joint family living, and they had this energy, and beyond that they had this tolerance for people. They just knew how to deal with people coming from all sorts of all kinds of personalities, whatever. But I've seen that most of us, having grown up in a nuclear sort of a family and whatnot, and with this increasing sort of interest in kind of having our own boundaries and spaces and whatnot, I feel it's becoming more and more difficult for us to be tolerant to the flaws and kind of difficulties that some people come up with, which is also, I feel, a hindrance to community building, because we just don't have the patience anymore, right? Everything is offending, and I see this sort of a trend as well across. So yeah, so I wonder like how yeah. Yes, Avani, yeah.
No, just to say that's the one point. Please continue. That's like spot on.
Yeah, and so with all these challenges that are there, right, for us these days, how do we really like connect as communities, especially to relevant sort of people, and how do we even stay consistent in the midst of all these challenges that we're facing, right? So in your experience, have you seen something like that?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. And I think where it connects for me, like what this raises for me is the flip side of the coin of not having like family structures like that, or the patience for things like that, is also the lack of patience with ourselves, right? So we are also now a part of a time where it's so easy to distract yourself from your own inner voice.
Exactly.
You pick up your phone. I mean, I see this in myself.
Mhm.
It's very difficult for me to sit and do nothing.
Yeah,
It's very difficult.
same.
So when you don't have some force to be in situations that are uncomfortable yet connecting, like these situations that you describe, and you also don't have the ability to sit with yourself, and like it's very easy to distract yourself or mistake reaching out to somebody on Instagram as like true connection. And I don't want to say that that's not real connection, but I think these two things put together with the absence of stuff in real life is where the problem starts to snowball.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you bring up something so critical, about our own difficulties in sitting with ourselves, right? And I feel that is also a root cause of why we are struggling in building like beautiful communities, because somewhere we are so disconnected from ourselves, right? And every workshop I have, right, and we have these discussions around empathy, but at the end of the day, it always comes back to self empathy, about how much of awareness do we really have about our own selves, so that we really do have the space in our heads for other people, like we really are able to hold other people in our minds, right? Because usually what happens is we tend to be so caught up in our own sort of struggles and whatnot, in our own insecurities and whatnot, that it's very difficult for us to create a mind space where we can hold other people, where we can kind of look at other people, think from their perspectives, which at the end of it is the root of connection, right? And without all these processes, how do you even connect with people? Yeah.
Yeah, this is like all of this is like ringing so true that I'm just like, whoa, I just need to sit with this for a little while.
Yeah.
I wanted to share personal experiences. I've been doing a nightly guided meditation with a group of people. So it's gone on for 28 days and I've just enrolled in another 28 days. And there's something that is amplified by being together and having that spiritual experience. You also just had a similar experience, and so maybe you can share about your pilgrimage experience as well. But I realized that for me, I think it's starting to become easier to sit with myself, but in a group of people. Maybe that's the transition, actually just being able to be alone by myself and going to that place, which I find very difficult to do. But if I'm a part of a group of people that's having that sort of deep experience, and we're not consciously distracting ourselves, it feels much more powerful. And so it's made me just realize that I need a community around me to go deep. And maybe eventually that will help me go deep when I'm on my own. But yeah, I'd love to hear, because I know you just did this too. And like, what was your experience?
I'm just, what just came up for me is maybe this sort of connecting with ourselves amidst a community is maybe how it's supposed to be done. Because recently I just watched this TED talk on how studies have been done and experiments have been done, and what they consistently show is that social integration, or the quality of our social relationships, really decide how long we live, the quality of our lives, and especially towards the end of it. So maybe like, even in finding ourselves, being a part of a community is an integral part of it, right? And maybe that is the way forward. But again, the struggle, at least for me, personally, even I've again and again experienced this, where you mentioned the meditation group that you're a part of. So there are some, especially every Tuesday, along with a couple of my colleagues, like Graham, for example, you may know him, via LinkedIn again. So we host some circles, like, every Tuesday. And what happens is, there are people who come and, we're all very actively participating there. But despite the fact that, every single time we go there, it's beautiful. By the end of it, we come out feeling so relieved, and it's a therapeutic experience, just being with people. And what we do there is we use reflective listening, over there, where we just listen to everyone who's a part of that community. But despite that, there are still times when a lot of us, despite knowing how beneficial it is for us, we are not able to show up due to our day-to-day whatever. So that's also a trend that I've seen consistently, where despite knowing how important communities are for us, like, we have this resistance to somehow kind of show up consistently. And have you seen anything, like, in any of the communities that you're working with, where people have kind of overcome this tendency, and how are they doing it, if at all? You have that happen?
Yeah, if at all. I think like the showing up part is so difficult, right? I mean, I once again will speak for myself here. I have seen this in other communities and with other community leaders. Like, I think as human beings, we're like really excited in the beginning to be a part of something, but the novelty wears off. And so it gets harder and harder to show up unless there's greater and greater rewards for something. What I see doing, who I see doing well with that is, I used to work a lot with faith-based communities, and we've talked about this before. And like, those communities that I've worked with in the past have found really, really good ways to continue people along that validation and reward change for continuing to show up. Like, if you could, like, for example, for a church that I used to work with, what they would do is, they would really, every Sunday they would do a Facebook Live. So this was during the pandemic, because people couldn't come to church. Okay. And the one thing they did was, they would drop, like, the person who was giving the live and doing like the religious discourse would say, hey, if there's anyone new here this Sunday, let us know in the comments, like type in the comments, because there'd be comments under the video. And they had a team of people reach out to those people one-on-one, and then quickly basically The goal would be to get them to fill out a form and then they quickly get on a call with them. So the reward here being, we see you. You're important.
Yeah.
You're important to this organization enough so that we want to give you this personal touch. And then the whole goal around that interaction on the phone was to help them find like smaller groups, study groups that they could be a part of, or if they were facing a challenge in their life, like maybe they were getting divorced or they were new parents or something like that, or they're young people, you know, they would put them with the appropriate leader who took that. And so what I love about that is like they didn't leave that importance and validation to chance.
Yeah.
In that instance. And I think like this is like a good example of sort of like how to combat some of the things that we're talking about. Like it's not left to chance.
Yeah.
And you're constantly then invited to be a part of these group experiences so that it can just like reiterate just how important the collective is, but they never let you forget that as an individual, you're like an important part of the chain. And so leaders that I know that do that kind of stuff, where they give that individual importance as well as the group and collective importance, like that seems to be the formula here in helping people stick and helping people be consistent, because no matter what, we all want to be a part of something bigger than us, but we also need to know that we're special. So I feel like that's
Yeah. So what I hear you say is, having that, because you mentioned faith-based communities and how well they're doing, I think having that common cause, or, that common anchor that we are all working together. So that kind of, maybe helps us go beyond our, what do you say, struggles, and kind of connect. And then there is also, I think, connecting to people's personal experiences, because that's when they learn the best, right? That's when they really connect the best. So making sure that these people feel seen and heard and letting them know of that, I think that also brings people back and back, and helps people show up consistently in communities, is what I understood from what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to share, Rasha, is that like, and we've had this conversation about us, our own individual communities, is like anything that's not done with joy.
Yeah.
It's palpable. It's you can feel it. Maybe not everyone's as much of an empath as we are, but I can feel it. I felt it when we were first talking and you were talking about trying some things, and I was like, no, don't do that. You're not going to get any joy out of that, right? And I think it's the same with me. Like if I feel forced to do something, the result is not going to be as life affirming for me and for anyone else that's a part of it, like no matter what it is that we're trying to create. I spoke to like a young, not young, but she's like a nascent community builder. She has her own wellness community, and I spoke to her today, and she is helping to convene a community of community leaders. So there's like a bunch of us that run communities, and then there's like a group for that. It's been around for a few years, and when she was like, oh, we're thinking about doing this and we're thinking about doing that, but I was looking at her face, and her face wasn't lighting up. There was no energy behind what she was saying. We're gonna try this. We're gonna try this, and I just stopped her and I said, is any of this making you happy? Like, is it joyful for you? And then she just sort of opened up and said, actually, no, I'm in a space where I'm recovering from burnout from running my own community. And I'm still a little scared to do this. I'm not quite ready to be out in the world like this. And I long for more intimate spaces. I long for depth. I don't want to do this song and dance of like, the way sometimes communities are built, right? It's great. We're all together. Like there's also that energy that's also fake a lot of times. It's not always good. So that's one thing that I realize is that like whatever energy you come into it with bleeds through. And so if empathy and connection are the intention, then you should feel that, like you should be honored in that space, because you can't create for others what you don't have, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that just really struck me today. And it led me on I ended up sharing a voice message where I was talking about some of the dynamics and amongst community builders. And I think that's one of the things is like, it's very tiring to do this work. There's often, you're creating empathy in the world. There's often not a lot of empathy for you as the builder and the creator of these things, as the convener, as the circle leader. And that can get very frustrating. And for people that want to do this as their life's work, or they think that it's glamorous or whatever, there's also the flip side of it, in that it can be draining if you're not balanced.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to offer that today, because that was something that happened today, and I was like, oh, we're having this conversation too, and I know that you would understand that. But I'm curious about if you've seen that on your side of the fence in your work, in your circles, or with any of your clients, like how no matter what the intention is, like it bleeds through. The real feeling bleeds through.
Yeah, I've seen that, like in some like workshops and whatnot. A very simple, it may not be a very deep example, but something very simple example that I can share is when there are certain programs that I do for corporates where some people are literally pushed into the programs. It's made mandatory for them to attend. And such people I've always seen do not really take much away from the programs. Whereas there are these others who literally, ask their managers, please include us in these programs. And they, literally, somehow enter into these programs willfully, wantingly, and these people, they tend to do really well. So again, that speaks to how, whatever your intention is, it really, bleeds through, and you make best out of something only when your heart and soul is in it. Otherwise, it doesn't really work as well for you. Yeah. So that's one example. Yeah.
Rasha, do you find that when those types of people are in the room who are not willing to be there, that it actually pulls the energy of others, right?
Absolutely.
Because it bleeds out. And so, I feel like that agency, sometimes that agency is missing.
We
don't
absolutely. That does happen a lot, and so which is why I've started actually speaking to companies and letting them know ahead of time that don't include anyone who's not really as interested. And there are always these people who really want to be a part of these sort of workshops, but they're not given a chance. So I always tell them, run some sort of a survey, like get people who actually sign up and are interested, because those are the people who will kind of take away the most, and it makes sense to include them in these workshops and whatnot. And again, all this talk, it's also reminding me of the importance of having some sort of a leadership mentality when it comes to communities, because somewhere somebody has to, because when you mentioned how it can be draining as well, and how it is a lot of work. Like, for example, for the faith-based example that you gave for the church, like there are certain people who are taking ownership and leadership there and kind of pushing people to again and again, come and show up. So that is also a very critical thing. I feel like when we are building communities, we need to have some leadership, like, roles or whatever, or at least build a sense of everyday leadership maybe in everybody, so that, so that these sort of, programs continue. Otherwise, somewhere people lose the motivation and whatnot to kind of come and, keep showing up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that you said everyday leadership. And it's like, for me, it's like the one thing that I can see working in this to sort of help with empathy building and connection and people taking responsibility and ownership is allowing people to be a part of the process, right? And it's like figuring out what are the roles, what are where are the gaps, because one person can't do everything, 10 people can't do everything, especially in large organizations, and then giving people a way to step up and shine in a very specific way. And this brings up for me how in a digital age, we often try to outsource the work of creating those roles, or outsource the work of even touching people one-on-one. We give that up because I have a platform, like, oh, I'm on Twitter, I have all these followers, and like followers are not a part of your leadership chain. They're not a part of the change that you're trying to make. They're not going to be a part of the process that you're trying to initiate. It's like sort of false in that sense. And unless you're able to replicate some of the human one-to-one connection that we had to do before any of these platforms existed. How did we build empathy? We had conversations with people. We reached out. We either talked to them on the phone, we went and we started knocking on
There's
doors.
no
Right?
shortcut to it. There's no shortcut to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. And you know, even before we wind up, there's something that I really wanted to check with you, or, you know, just have a conversation around, and which is how, I don't know whether it could be something that I'm experiencing very personally, and it isn't the case with a lot of others. But you know, the older I grow, the more I am seeing that, you know, there is this whole aspect of, how do I put it? Do you know about the social exchange theory? I learned it, you know, when I had a paper to an exam around social psychology. And what it says is any human relationship, right? There is always that exchange factor where, you know, I give you something, then you give me something in return, sort of, you know, yeah. So every human relationship basically works on that factor. And I remember when I first read that theory, I was like, is this really true? I mean, I don't think so. I mean, there is altruism. There are situations where, you know, we selflessly kind of do things for people. But the more, the older I get, the more I realize that, okay, maybe the world does actually work in that sort of, you know, a way. And, you know, remember you had kind of connected me with someone right after we met, and, you know, we had a conversation about how, yeah, there are no enough you know, people that we can trust, and somehow this sort of social exchange thing does kind of create a mistrust in people, right? Or it kind of does act in certain cases as a barrier. Like, I mean, I'm definitely sure that, you know, there are evolutionary whatever explanations for this, and it is good in a lot of ways, but you know, but I feel this aspect kind of creates mistrust, or maybe it's our perception about, you know, how we kind of perceive that, you know, asking people for favors all the time, or, you know, giving people something only if somebody returns a favor, we look at it as something negative, and maybe it really is not. And, you know, and I feel community building just becomes a little more difficult because of all these sort of processes in the back that run within our own sort of minds. So I just wanted to pick your brains on that. Yeah.
This is like such an interesting theory, and it, like, I don't know, it like puts into words what I've seen.
Yeah.
I think that this mistrust comes from things. I think this mistrust comes when the person perceiving that, the person feeling that, I think one of the reasons is we have given too much in the past and been taken advantage of. So we personally didn't have boundaries, and I'm guilty of this. We personally didn't set any boundaries, or we let the wrong type of people have access to us. Like, you know, exchange between consenting parties is a different type of feeling than an exchange between a party that consented but feels resentful.
Yeah.
Or consented but didn't have agency in the moment to actually give real consent.
Yeah.
Like, didn't feel like they had agency, they felt obligated. And I think like some of those are cultural paradigms. Like, you and I come from a culture where there's a lot of social obligation on top of everyone's head. I think that there are patterns in our lives that can cause us to entertain people who would take advantage of accessibility as well, and breaking out of that pattern is really hard. And so I definitely feel like that mistrust comes when you've sort of experienced some of these things. And it takes going into yourself to realize, like, the problem is not always fully on somebody else, right? Like, it takes two hands to clap in the situation. And I've definitely found myself, actually, I'll tell you this, myself and my partner, my husband, we're both, I mean, we both consider ourselves to be nice people who give people time. But I found in the past that I am resentful of giving time, but I gave them the time.
Yeah.
And he's found that he has a lot of people who just take advantage of the fact that he's helping and like don't give anything in return. And he's starting to curate his life a little bit. In fact, I mean, I read something and I could read it to you in a little bit, but there is like a sort of spiritual influencer. I don't know if you've heard of her. Her name is Gala Darling. And she talked about curating your life, curating the people in your life. And it touches on some of this. It's like the people that you surround yourself with, even on social media, even the way you curate your Instagram feed, curate your LinkedIn feed, the time that you spend, you have to realize that like not everyone, some people are not trying to live a life filled with positive energy and love and empathy. Some people are just in it to take advantage and to make it through the day. And so she says it in a very colloquial way, so I'll read it later, but it reminded me of reading that yesterday. So that's where I feel it's like we have to take ownership for the part that we play in those dynamics. And I think that you're spot on with this, like there's gonna be some type of exchange. The issue is that some people don't want to acknowledge that there really is an exchange because they feel it's bad, so we do judge it. And that's also wrong because there is something that we're getting out of it. And once you're honest with yourself about what you're getting out of it, I mean, now we're getting into like pop psychology a little bit, but once you're honest with it, it becomes easier to just look it in the face and say, okay, well, this person is in my life to give me access to this type of experience. And for that access, I am giving them X, right? Or Y. Once you're able to call it on the face, it becomes easier to deal with. When you're pretending like it's not, or you're not honest with yourself, or you've given up your own agency in the situation or not taking responsibility for curating that experience with that person, that's where it gets to be a problem.
Absolutely. So just like, again, as usual, it circles back to that whole idea of self-empathy, where you really need to be better connected with your own self before you can kind of build better communities, I guess. And that is where it all begins. And yeah, I think, do we continue, or I think we've spoken.
We could continue easily.
But maybe that's always been the case. Yeah, that's always been the case. I mean, we just go on and on and on. And maybe we could, I'd love to do a part 2 on communities and whatnot. I mean, we could collect more ideas like, in the next couple of weeks and just jump back on a call. And I would love to have this discussion further. But thank you so much, Avani. Like always, I really enjoy, speaking with you. And there are so many things that, just come up for me every time, we are in conversation. So I'm truly grateful for this experience with you. Yeah.
What a pleasure. Yeah. And I'm so curious if people see this or hear this, how they're feeling about these things, how these dynamics show up in their life, examples that they've seen. I'm happy to I loved having this conversation with you, but the opportunity to widen the conversation a little bit is also exciting intentionally, and understanding what the exchange is, the social exchange. Absolutely.
The community manager in you just like, came alive. Yeah. But thank you, my dear. Like I hope to again have another session with you very soon.
I hope so.